Hey everybody, it's RJ, your host, and welcome to Hash It Out. In this episode, I'll be speaking with Eric Leslie of Cheeba about the maturation of the cannabis edible market and the state of corporate involvement since the founding of the company in 2009. We'll also discuss the shifts in cannabis consumer trends and digital marketing strategies during the course of the coronavirus pandemic, the latest news regarding cannabis edible regulations in New Jersey, and much more. Without further ado, let's hash it out. My guest today is the Chief Marketing Officer of the cannabis edible company Cheeba. Welcome to the show, Eric Leslie. Hello, sir. How are you today?
Doing good, RJ. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. I appreciate you taking the time to share all that you've got going on over at Cheeba, as well as some of the latest cannabis edible news happening here in the U.S. Before we start here, where are you joining us virtually from today?
Yeah, so we're headquartered in Denver, Colorado.
Right on. And I understand we were talking just a moment ago before we started recording that we're both Midwest boys, you from Ohio and me from Michigan. And the week that we're recording this is a very dodgy week for us to be getting together, but we both agreed before the recording that we're gonna keep it civil this week. We're gonna keep it civil. We might have words next week, but this is a safe space. So thank you so much for being here today.
You got it, RJ. Yep, we're gonna be super nice to each other. It's all love here.
Sure, it's all love. It's all, yeah, there's no beef. There's no off-camera beef happening here. Yeah,
I don't think so. We're good. We're good,
we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So, just to dive in here, you know, Cheeba is, of course, a very renowned brand and company here in the U.S., but for those who may not be familiar out there, I understand that you helped launch Cheeba in 2009 with the goal, of course, to create consistently potent and discreet cannabis-infused edibles. Now, this was before the Washington and Colorado, where you're now headquartered, became the first states in the U.S., of course, to legalize recreational cannabis use in 2012. So my first question for you is just, I'm so curious to know what it was like to sort of start a cannabis company before any of this legislation existed, and then in what way did that sort of benefit y'all over at Cheeba once legalization did start to occur throughout the country?
That's a really good question. So 2009, our founder, James, actually had a home grow there in Colorado, had some excess trim, wasn't sure what to do with it, started playing around with extracting the oil from that trim and started infusing it into some edibles. At the time, there were no real regulations or standards. You had your cookies, you had your brownies, you had no idea what was going to happen, what the dosage was, and you're either going to be on the floor or you're going to be mad that you spent the $20. And so he began experimenting with a bunch of different candies, found that taffy and the viscosity of taffy held cannabis oil really, really well in a very consistent manner. And so he launched Cheeba. He reached out to me a couple months later and says, hey, I want you to try this thing. Sent me this chocolate taffy piece, took a bite out of it, and I totally understood where he was going with it, hopped on board, and you know, over a decade later, here we are. There's 3 of us at the ownership level, you know, working really hard to help not only define who we are in the place, but an entire industry. So, you know, when I reflect back on what we did back in 2009, 10, and 11, you know, there were no standards. And I think the one thing that we helped do at Cheeba was create that standard. We always had our brand pillars as potent, consistent, and discreet. There were no consistent measures for edibles in 2009 and 10 and 11. There was no consistency. And so we went to the drawing board and began testing the oil before we infused it into our products, testing our edible after we had it infused. And those were things that weren't happening in the marketplace at the time. You know, I say it now, it's like, well, no, duh, that's what you do, right? Back then, that wasn't happening. And it was really a monopoly when you went to, or not a monopoly, but it was, you know, you were taking a really big risk of, is this edible going to work for you or not? And even within the same cookies or brownies that you're buying at the time, like the next time you go, you're not going to have the same experience as the last time.
Right.
That was the difference with Cheeba, is you knew the expectations of the experience every time you're going to purchase the product. And that allowed us to play in the space as well as from a brand perspective. You know, the branding wasn't something people were thinking about back in 2009, 10, 11, even 12 for the edible space. And so that gap, that opportunity just existed. We didn't have a strategy for, here's a grandiose plan to launch an edible brand, and have a decade of experience in this marketplace. We genuinely caught lightning in a bottle. The Cheeba Chews brand won the 2010 High Times Cannabis Cup in Colorado for our Decadose, 175 milligrams in a little tiny piece of taffy, and the legend was born.
Wow. Now, I understand that the founder of Cheeba Chews is also from Ohio, correct? So you're all sort of like, you have those Midwest roots. We do have, of course, y'all started in 2009 before there were any regulations or legislation in place. We do have some now, although they are, they have such a high amount of variation depending on which state or which jurisdiction or which city you might be in. Yep. And so coming from the Midwest, now headquartered in Colorado, what is it like to sort of juggle the variations in regulations throughout the U.S.? How does that not keep your head from, spinning 720 every day?
So before I go any further, we have a third partner, Dave. He's from New Jersey, so I cannot leave Dave out. He's a Jersey guy, right?
Totally.
So yes, we got Midwest, but we have Dave over there.
Yes, indeed.
From the East Coast. He linked up with James back in 2010. He's working at a dispensary, got a Cheeba Chew, and said, dang, I'm going to go, work with this guy. So we all started back then, 2000, like I said, 2009, 2010 timeframe. When it went legal in Colorado, and I think we turned in 2014 is when we actually turned the market on. Everybody's standards had to reach the same bar, and I think that was something that was unique to us before that, is the consistency, the potency, the discretion, this little piece of taffy you put in your pocket after you nibble on it and, go about your way. Those were unique attributes to the brand. When regulations came in place, everybody's floor was raised and everybody had a potent and a consistent product, right? So it kind of changed the narrative from our standpoint. But kind of going back to your question, super challenging. I can't tell you how much packaging waste, product waste, going back to the drawing board. We're a really small company. There are 3 of us at the ownership level. We're zero debt, no investors. We don't come from corporate backgrounds. And so, especially early on, we had to do a ton of learning. And we had to learn on the fly. So our resiliency, more than anything, is kind of the biggest lesson that we learned. Because I can't tell you how many times a regulation would hit and we weren't ready for it. In 14 to 15 to even 16. We really didn't begin to figure it out until we started to go into multiple states, California, Nevada, Oklahoma, Massachusetts, where we said, hey, we really got to get our stuff together because we're developing partnerships in multiple states. They're relying on us to be available and ready when regulations are updated, to provide a solution that is regulation proof, really, right? So we standardized our child-resistant packaging. We standardized our manufacturing process, and we put a package together that allowed us to go into any market across the United States and having a compliant product that the state's going to allow. So that's really the learning that we did over the last 3 to 4 years, was putting together a consistent package that could be implemented in any market, and make sure that we hold to the standards of those regulations. Because if you're trying to develop a product for Massachusetts, which is 5 milligrams, 100 milligrams max, compared to Colorado, where recreational is 10, 100, right? 2 different strategies there really to be able to do it. But because of our package and consistency in our offer, we're able to kind of adjust to either market and have that same consistent experience no matter where you find us.
I'm glad that you mentioned the constant learning that you mentioned, because I've said it before on the show that I think the cannabis industry really sets itself apart because the education doesn't stop in the cannabis industry, especially now with the varying state regulations and the absence of federal policy or regulation or legislation at all. There is a constant learning that you need to be enthusiastic about to stay abreast of the various moving parts. And you also mentioned the resiliency that you needed to strike, which is great. And I think it's just a metaphor, of course, for just the cannabis plant in and of itself, how it grows in the face of adversity. So I understand that as chief marketing officer, your specific expertise is in, anything from client relations to product design, which you've mentioned, and sales strategy in both the medical and adult use markets across the U.S. I understand that before that, also, if I have this information correct, you founded and ran an award-winning production company and operated digital marketing agencies. So my next question for you would be, you started in 2009. You've been around for such a long time. However, we are experiencing, and to use this word once more in this day and age, an unprecedented era that is a global pandemic. And so my question is, how have cannabis sales and marketing strategies from what you've seen sort of changed during the course of the pandemic? And how have shifts in consumer methods, like perhaps people smoking less dried cannabis and certainly passing joints with each other a lot less than we used to. How has all of that sort of affected your business, and what trends have you been seeing?
Yeah, so kind of starting with the end there, cannabis is really, it's a personal experience, but there is also a social component to it. You just said pass the joint. I think we're all smoking our own joints, but we're still in a circle together. We all bring our own bowls and smoke our own individual bowls, but still share the experience together, right? I think what we saw at the beginning of 2020, and for me, working with the brand, I didn't do a lot of digital advertising because, number one, there's a ton of hurdles in the digital space for a cannabis brand. You can't do anything on social beyond advocacy, right? You can't do advertisements. There's really limitations. And so our investment into the digital space beyond influencers and building, a network of customers and fans, was non-existent. We could track and trace the work we did at the dispensary footprint, our print advertisements. We could see the progress that was making, but digital, there was nothing trackable because we're sending them to a website that they could just look at our pretty products. Maybe a dispensary finder, that's on the website, but there was no transaction that could happen there beyond, building relationships, right? When 2020, with COVID hit, I remember it was like, February, March, we had to put the pause on some really big in-market projects we were doing. And literally that month of March, we shifted our entire 2020 strategy to go all digital. And so we went with a lot of content development, video content, and I found distribution avenues that would take cannabis, which is ridiculously costly. Can be extremely wasteful if you don't know what you're doing, because people will take your dollars and show you that the ad spend is happening, and you'll see zero traction. So we spent some time learning the digital landscape as far as what I can do with push advertising, with creating great content. I think that's the most important part, right? Content that people want to consume, and then finding the avenues in which we can distribute it. The other thing we saw is the rise of digital menus. People weren't going into dispensary anymore to shop because they couldn't. They had to go online, put the order in, and then they went and picked it up. You weren't browsing in a dispensary anymore because it was too scary to do, right? Even now, the dispensary experience, I think, has fundamentally changed, where we spend less time thinking about what we're going to buy when we're there and more time planning so that we can get in and out of that place as soon as possible, right? So our brand architecture was built around the shopping experience. You found our brand in that dispensary everywhere, whether it's walls, on the floor, displays, pillows on couches, and that stuff has less of an impact now. And so making sure consumers are thinking about you before they enter the dispensary is the big shift that we went into, using digital advertising, looking at the digital landscape and making sure that if we had an opportunity to feature the brand at the top of the dispensary menu, that is there, because just that top of mind expectation, especially in markets where there are a ton of options. The saturation is out of control in some markets like California and Oklahoma. You have way too many options, right? Not enough time to decide which one you want to choose from. So making sure the brand is present not only at the purchase experience, but also leading up to it, was really the big fundamental shift in using digital and being creative in those channels in order to make sure that our brand is reaching our potential customers and fans. That was the big shift that we took in 2020. And again, I think that shift is going to continue on as the buying behavior has fundamentally changed.
Totally. I'm totally with you on that. The struggle of digital advertising for cannabis, I think, is it's a problem that so many of us, depending on where you are in the cannabis industry, that's such a big obstacle, right? Like you mentioned,
Silly.
not being able to post anything on social if it's not advocacy. Like,
Yep.
we can hardly like market this show on social because it's not always seen as advocacy. Like if we're just talking about different cannabis topics, and you mentioned that we were in a lot of different industries, people were forced to have to go digital.
Yeah.
So that just makes me wonder, like, what has it been like then to sort of, in this new day and age, like strike the balance between having to go digital to be at the top of the consumer mind, like you mentioned, and then also having to, play nice in the metaverse to make sure that you don't receive those strikes and have all of your, all of the following that you may have generated, like, gone just like that. What has it been like to strike that balance in this day and age where it's more essential now more than ever?
Yeah, so two good stories there. One is we had to pull back on, one of our biggest channels is Instagram, and we've had to pull back on posts for Instagram because they've been on a tangent, like pulling back posts that we had from like 14 and 15 on like stupid stuff that they, and like literally like they would shut us out of the account for a day at a time. We're like, this is it, we're shut down. So our shift is we went into more stories, knowing that stories are at the top of your page when you open Instagram. So we're regularly feeding stories now and doing less posts, and only really posting when it's really important stuff, because there's a good chance that it's going to get flagged and you're going to get yourself in trouble. So that's the one thing we did, as far as in our social channels, to kind of navigate around the sensitivity of advertising or advocacy within the cannabis space. The second thing, and this is more of a difficulty, man, like I looked at almost every channel I could to do some push advertising. We created, back in the summer of 2020, we did a series of video content, really good 15, 30-second spots. They're really fun, real social, got really good response for it. I'm like, I need more people to see this. Where can I put it? The one channel we got really close with and like a negotiated terms, ready to do it, was We Send It, right? There's a lot of creatives that go to WeSendIt.com in order to upload and download files, right? Mm-hmm. Well, they actually solicited me to advertise on the channel. We went through, bidding process, negotiated terms. I even had designs for, the template and everything. Last second, senior executives came back and said, no, we can't do it. Like I wasted, 2 weeks of planning and some art and creativity. And then all of a sudden, the very top of the business, and these were, senior executives, that I was negotiating with. I was not with an account manager. I was dealing with like, look, you guys can't do this. Don't waste my time. It's fine. I've been down this path many times before. Right. They went right to C-suite, and C-suite had to shut it down. And I've had that story happen to us over and over and over. We went to AMC and said, hey, I want to put these on rated R only, movie screens, rated R, right? There are not kids in there. They're not allowed, right? And they're like, yes, this is a great idea. We can do it. They have to page New York, or wherever, their C-suite is, and they shut it down. So, it's really just striking the balance of being creative in the channels, but not giving up. Like that resiliency we talked about. Like I snuck in, don't tell anyone, but I snuck in a series of video ads on Discovery. They didn't realize what was happening at the senior level until after the campaign was over. I went back to them and I said, hey, let's do it again. That's awesome. We're on Discovery, and we're pushing on to all these very major channels. They said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we're never going to do that again. Sorry for the mix-up. But we can't do any more business with you." And it really comes down to just a lack of knowledge, right? I think we're going to look back in history and say there's some really silly regulations and prohibitions still in place for our industry. That are slowing down, kind of the normalization, right? And the acceptance of cannabis in the plant. And it's not being done to protect anybody. It's more being done out of fear, in control, really. And I think those are silly, silly things. And we'll see that in the future, looking back to say, guys, you missed opportunities to really move the conversation forward. And you weren't doing it for anything other than greed or ignorance, really.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, years from now, AMC and Discovery are going to be punching the air on a piss that they missed an opportunity such as that. That's such a crazy story. I'm glad that you shared that with me. I love that insider.
They're going to hate me even more now, so I'm never getting on those channels now that I told you about it, that's for sure. Yeah.
Oh man, well I'm glad you were willing to put it all on the line for that because that was
they
incredible
me,
information.
Man.
Yeah.
What can I do? They flayed me, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
We're airing them out right here. Right here. You're on lock, Discovery. I'm still gonna watch 90 Day Fiance,
that's
but
right.
I'm gonna look at you a little differently now.
Yeah, that's
right. Speaking of, as you mentioned, silly regulations that seem rather, in many ways, fear-based or ignorance-based or just arbitrary in many ways. And this is also a shout out to Dave, who is, as we know now, from New Jersey. New Jersey has been making waves in the cannabis edible regulation space. Because, although New Jersey is still likely, months away from their first legal recreational cannabis sales, state regulators are already considering whether or not to loosen rules that bar edibles. The New Jersey Cannabis Regulatory Commission restricts most edibles under interim rules that were adopted 3 months ago, and they will have to enact permanent rules for the recreational cannabis program by next August, so they're on the clock.
Yeah.
The executive director of the Coalition for Medical Marijuana New Jersey said that they believe that there may be reason for extra regulations on edibles, like perhaps a special license, but not a full prohibition, which is great. Okay, great. They don't want to prohibit like the edibles. That's great. And then an Atlantic City Cannabis Commission member warned that restricting edible access will bolster the illicit market. So what are your thoughts on that? And then what do you think the implications are the implications that might have for New Jersey's upcoming cannabis industry?
Yeah, it seems silly, and it sounds mostly based off of just a lack of awareness on the edible market. We have shown as an industry we can regulate ourselves. We can put in place high standards. We can ensure the prevention of overconsumption, accidental ingestion. We've gone through those hurdles. Colorado is the perfect example of the maturation of an edible industry and the hoops that we've had to jump through. It can be done. You regulate how many or how much is in a single piece, 10 milligrams, let's call it. And you regulate that it's in child-resistant packaging. Our industry has matured enough to this point that every state has that same standard. We don't have to operate out of fear because of what we see in the illicit market. All it will do, as you said, is feed that illicit market because people will demand alternatives to smoking or vaping or dabbing, right? Edibles provide a gateway of opportunity of exploration when it comes to cannabis. The way we can isolate cannabinoids, reintroduce them into edibles, the way that our bodies break down cannabis versus the instant gratification from smoking it, you're missing an opportunity to serve a wider demographic of people that can look to cannabis from a wellness perspective by saying no edibles whatsoever. So obviously I'm on board with you guys need to let edibles into the marketplace and just look at the roadmaps that are already created. We can solve this problem really, really fast if we just set the reasonable standards, and you'll see the fear tactics of your kids are going to have them all over and they're going to be handing it out at Halloween. Never happens, guys. It's because we're a mature industry and we have high standards for ourselves, and there's a lot at risk for us. The last thing we want to do is jeopardize all of the hard work and investments we put into our businesses by having it in the hands of underage children or having people overdose on a product because they don't know how many milligrams are in it.
Yeah, no one gives away edibles for Halloween. Like they're not. First of all, they're not cheap, and second of all, they're mine when I buy them. You know what I mean? Like I'm not sharing them with some kid.
Yeah, exactly. No, not happening.
Yeah, and it's just I agree with you. It seems very ignorance-based and fear-based. This sort of,
Yeah.
Should we restrict them? Should we have a special permit for edibles in New Jersey?
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's even less justifiable when you do, as you mentioned, have examples in
Yes.
states like Colorado who are doing it right, and
Yeah.
have been a shining example of, as you say, the maturation of cannabis legislation in the state.
One other point there, RJ,
please.
is you're just
Yeah.
going to send business across state lines. I mean, New York is going
There
to
it is.
legalize. Massachusetts is already there. Like,
Yep.
yeah, you say illicit, but you're going to take people and move those tax dollars out of your state. Why are you doing? Why would you even think to do something like? It's just common sense that if they can't access the products inside of your state, they're going to go across state lines and get it somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm right there with you. It's and maybe it's the money. Maybe it's the money that'll finally help them realize. That would be an unfortunate way for them
Right.
to realize that, but
Yeah.
I guess better late than never.
Right.
We are rounding out the end of 2021. I can't believe it. It's gone by in half of a blink of an eye. I feel like I fell asleep in January and I woke up and it's now December almost. So what have y'all got in the works to close out the year over at Cheeba Chews? And then what have you got anything exciting planned in the next few years that you can share with me that you can break here?
Yeah. Ooh, RJ, looking for something tasty.
Going for that scoop.
Yeah, find the scoop. So I think the biggest shift that we've seen, and I kind of touched on it earlier. I said, hey, we had this unique identity when we began in the marketplace. When legal cannabis came to market, everybody had that same standard of expectation for potency and consistency, right? We had to go back to the drawing board to some extent to redefine who we were and what we had to offer the marketplace. And so one of the biggest developments in the largest growing segment of our business is our wellness line. We launched a Sleepy Chew, I think it was in 2019. We all have sleep issues, man. We're all terrified every night to fall asleep. And so we launched our Sleepy Chew, it's THC with CBN, 100 milligrams per pack, 20 pieces. So we weren't going for the maximum amount of THC we could put in a piece. We wanted to maximize the amount of doses you could have in a package. So 5 milligrams of THC, 2.5 milligrams of CBN, just a splash of melatonin. That allows me to tell you it's a sleep aid. And that quickly became our highest selling product in every market we introduced it. So right after Sleepy Chews came along, we decided to launch a trifecta. This was a little riskier of a delivery because you can't make health claims in our industry. Nobody wants to touch it. Our trifecta is an equal part CBG, CBD, and THC. 5 milligrams of each, 20 per pack. This is really for mental wellness. It's for antidepressant, anti-anxiety, but I can't tell you that because I can't make health claims. So I just need you to try it, and you're going to see the difference it makes in your life and in your mental state. The third product we literally just launched last month in Colorado is our Energy Chews. We're able to extract THCV, very rare cannabinoid, and infuse that with our THC product. It's really good for morning, daytime, good burst of focused energy. What we're seeing is if I did this back in 2010, people would not have an understanding of these minor cannabinoids. But because of the maturation of society and consumers, more likely to be acceptable of the plant, they're reaching out to say, hey, there's a wellness alternative. There's more than just getting high I'm looking for from cannabis. Can you help me? And that's where, again, our edibles as an industry have a lane and an opportunity to introduce the plant in different ways, right? Because I can control the cannabinoids and the terpenes that I'm putting into the product in a different ratio and way that you can from smoking flower. And so that's the biggest push and shift that we're seeing is, minor cannabinoids are becoming the hero. THC has always been the star of the show, always will be. But minor cannabinoids are now showing up as the hero in people's lives because it's helping them in ways that just THC can't.
Yes.
So that's our biggest thing, wellness. As far as anything breaking for you, RJ, we just hope to be in multiple markets. We are looking to launch not only in your big markets like New York and even New Jersey, I'm really interested in New Mexico and Missouri.
Ooh,
They
yeah.
call them the flyover states, but there's a lot of people. When we entered Oklahoma, it changed my perspective completely. 10
Yes.
years ago, if you thought about cannabis in Oklahoma, you're going to jail for your life, right? And now, 10 years later, it's the hottest medical market, in the country. And it just goes to you that's not a destination location. People aren't flying into Tulsa to hang out and go ski or whatever it is, right? It's local individuals saying, hey, I do have interest in this. I'm curious about it. Just give me access.
Yes.
And so our opportunity really is to not just go to these major big markets on the coast, but also in between. Montana's another really beautiful state, but it's spread out, right? And there's not a lot of people there, but there's enough people there that need the plant and the opportunities it provides to them that we have to find our way into these states and to provide them with products that they need for their everyday life.
Yeah, absolutely. It truly is all about accessibility, and I'm so glad that you mentioned not neglecting the middle of the country, where there are so many Americans out there who are looking for wellness or just accessibility to this to these products and these plants. So that's so great that you mentioned that. And we will certainly, of course, be keeping an eye on all that you've got going on over at Cheeba Chews. I'd love to check out these Sleep Chews because God knows that Sleep and I are great friends, but we don't see each other nearly as much as we should. So I will certainly be keeping an eye on all of that and all that you've got going on over at Cheeba Chews. If you ever have anything else in the works, please feel free to contact us and come back on the show. We'd love to have you again for a rehash it out sometime in the future, man.
There you go. Love it, RJ. This is really good talk.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, thank you so much, man. I appreciate it. Eric, Leslie, everybody, that is it for Hash It Out, y'all. Thank y'all so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. I'm your host, RJ Balde, and I will catch y'all in the next one. Peace out. Hey, everybody. Thanks for checking out our channel. Click here to watch another episode of Hash It Out. To find more cannabis industry reporting, insider stories, and to stay up to date on the latest trends, make sure to subscribe and keep up with our TRICHOMES community app. Download it now for free, and we'll see you there.